Has anyone been there while you're here? It's just an astounding restaurant, which meant that I missed out on what apparently was the gig of the century. I'd like to congratulate Roger and Alan for apparently really blowing away the crowd. Either it was you guys or it was the alcohol that apparently was in full flow. But I found myself reflecting on why I do what I do. And I think it's because of this. I really want to explain things. I really want to explore. I'm an explorer. And I really don't want to let those comments of it's got a mind of its own just go through to the keeper, which is a very sort of Commonwealth phrase, but that idea of letting them go through without thinking about them. So I find myself thinking about these things. How to explain it? And for me, I'm immediately attracted towards the brain. This is just a natural predisposition I have to think, well, that's where I'd like to look for that. So in 1 cubic centimetre of the brain, you have about 1 billion synapses. In 1 cubic centimetre, it's about the same size as maybe the end of your index finger or your thumb. There are 1 billion synapses. I reckon that's cool. And that's only the half of it. There are 1 trillion neuroglial synapses in that. Think of that number. Think of the options for connection, and I love that complexity. And this is something that I brought up on Monday, this idea of a cortical body matrix, and to take that a step further, is really a conceptual model trying to make sense of all the networks we have running from the brainstem to the thalamus to the cortex. We could call them brainstemothalamo-cortical loops, and how they behave in response to stimuli that are occurring in our personal space or in our body, and I touched on some of that stuff. But how do we make sense of this in a conceptual paradigm that we can integrate into clinical practice? And to do that, I've drawn very heavily on the researchers who are working with computer-brain interfaces in monkeys, the people who are growing neurons in petri dishes or the equivalent and watching how they connect and how they modulate and what dendrites get lost and what synapses get pruned or fostered. And on the back of all that research, and there's a lot of research on that, a lot of people with PhDs, that was a really interesting observation from Brian as well, that there are more physios with PhDs than there are doctors in Australia. Doctors with PhDs in Australia. And some of the response to that, I think, was leading into this idea of a potential crisis in manual therapy. My perspective on that is that and this is I think it's an old Chinese proverb, that I think the word for crisis is the same as the word for opportunity. And I get really excited about the opportunity that arises when we have people dedicated to understanding and pursuing that. The challenge is that we all stay together on the same page and on the same boat, that we don't jump ship from each other, and I think that's really important. So if we were to conceptualise the brain as a mass of neurotags, it might look something like that. And the idea of a neurotag is just a different word for a network of neurons. And really we need to say a network of brain cells, because that network has glial cells, more glial cells than it has neurons. And it's this neuroimmune interaction that we can say, well, there's a network that over time have all developed pathways that work together. And when they are active together, they produce some sort of output. They actually produce something. And that production is the thing that still is a mystery to neuroscientists. But if we were to look slightly more closely at this bunch of neurotags and start unravelling them like you might a cadaver, if we could do that in the brain, we keep going back until we get these networks that look like this. For example, this might be, for example, a pain neurotag. And what I mean by that is a network of brain cells, neural and immune, that when they work together, the person experiences pain. So another way of conceptualising that is this. Can you stand up if you were born in July, please? Stand up. Okay, what's the date today? Between us, we should be able to work this out. Yeah, really? 7th of July? Is it? Okay, can you raise your hand if you're born on the 7th of July? Happy birthday! Congratulations! That's fantastic, and what's really appropriate about this is that you are a thalamus cell. You are a critical relay station in almost everything that happens to the body. And just have a look at your fellow cells in this neurotag that we might say is the pain neurotag. And let's say we've got the human lying down on their side like this, and their front's here, and if you want to have some quick neuroanatomy, this part of the brain here is called the front, this is called the back, and that's the top up there, and you're the thalamus, and you get messages from the spinal cord that might say, for example, there's danger in your back. If you turn around and look at your neurotag, and it's not until all of those other people stand up that the individual experiences pain. And let's say you have to be prepared to respond to this. Can you sit down again? Here's a real life example from our world. Let's say you reach down into the back of your car, picking up your pet kangaroo, and it gives a kick, and you tear or you tweak a bit of the annulus on the outside of the laft, the living adaptable force transducer that used to be called the intervertebral disc. Because it's got nothing to do with the disc, right? It's completely undisc-like. Just in case anyone didn't realise that it is impossible for me to line someone up in the back row there, just peel off a bit of skin and muscle and boom, shoot them with my disc. It does not do that. It's not like a watermelon seed or a lump of soap that you can slip out, right? So let's say you've got this tweak and the danger message comes up and that activates, happy birthday, man, can you stand up? And you turn around and all other things being equal, the back pain neurotag stands up, can you stand up? Back pain neurotag. And now the person is in pain. Oh, now they're in pain. So, early Parkinson's. Disappointing. Then the scenario keeps going and the kangaroo's out and you're sore and the kangaroo's hopping away and you look over and it's about to hop in front of a truck. And for that moment, that input's really important. And can this little group here please sit down? Now there is no back pain. There is no back pain whatsoever. There is concern for Skippy. And then Skippy makes it clear, you think that's fortunate, and the inhibitory control changes, and up you go again. And in that second, now there is back pain. Because it's this group of brain cells that are responsible for producing it. And that's how we conceptualise the best of what we understand. Can you sit down again, please? I hope that makes sense. This might be an example that you have brain cells that do lots of different things, and you can see here some classic brain areas that we know are often active when someone is in pain. And one of the really important concepts in understanding neural networks or neurotags is that every member of a neurotag has multiple neurotags. So they're multitasking cells. For example, that cell there might be involved in this neurotag. It might be involved in that neurotag. It might be involved in that neurotag. And that cell has multiple functions. Let's say this was a cell in secondary sensory cortex and was involved in the production of back pain. It's more than likely that it will also be involved in the processing and experience of touch, of tactile performance. It's likely that it will also be involved in proprioceptive representations. Where are you at this moment in time? Now, for someone like me, as you will remember, and you'll be pleased to know if anyone came, well, it's clearly that at least some of you came on Monday. There's probably an overlap of at least a few of you. I gave a demonstration in order to win a bet and get a copy of Miles Davis' vinyl album that is very hard to get, and you'll be pleased to know that the person has seen this on Twitter, and I am now the owner of a very rare Miles Davis record. So thank you for whoever put it on Twitter. I appreciate that. But you'll know from that I have pretty precise neurotags that give me the pelvic tilt. And it would be fair to say that the neurons that are involved in representing those parts of my body are also involved in making them hurt. I hope that's intuitively sensible. So what governs how neural networks work? And ultimately it comes down to these principles of influence and probability. And this idea of influence is one that we can easily put into our lexicon. How influential is this input? And what I mean by that is how likely is that input to change a future input and to change activation of another neurotag. And I'll explain what I mean by that. The most influential neural networks in the brain have two characteristics. One is that they have a lot of cells in them, a lot of brain cells, neural and immune cells, and nociception is a powerful driver of networks in the brain. So we would argue that nociceptive neural networks or nociceptive neurotags are high mass. There's a lot of cells involved. And you can see that on brain scans and you can see that in animal studies. These networks are almost hardwired. In fact, nociceptive networks, we would argue, are hardwired. And I'm nervous about that wiredness because of all the glia, and they don't work like wires, they work more like conductive pads, or gels if you like. But the idea of it being very old structures, evolutionarily and development-wise, and it's a high-mass structure. So if you get a noxious stimulus, and that manages to send a noxious stimulus to the brain, so a message to the brain, danger message, you're likely to activate a big, fat neurotag. And that is going to be very influential on what you end up feeling. So there's a nice relationship between nociceptive input and pain. Remembering that nociceptive input is not enough and it's not necessary for pain, it's just highly influential. The other thing is the probability that the target neuron and therefore its neurotag will fire compared to the neurons around it. And one way of conceptualising this is as though we are precise in our neural networks. They are high precision networks, and that depends on inhibition of unwanted brain cell activity. We call that intracortical, intra-brain inhibition. So there's a whole range of examples of changes in influence disrupting this idea of the cortical body matrix. And there's a large body of research on this, and I'll just give you a snapshot of a few little things. So these are data that we collected from people with complex regional pain syndrome, and if you're not quite familiar with that, it used to be called reflex sympathetic dystrophy. It's the sort of patient where if they turn up in a florid CRPS state, it's intimidating for everyone, including you as the clinician, and these people are in trouble. So 1 in 5 people with greater than 6-month diagnosis of CRPS have planned or attempted suicide to get out of their pain and disruption. These people are in severe trouble. And their cortical body matrix is highly disturbed. And in this particular study, we look at the influence of a tactile input from their good hand compared to a tactile input from their bad hand. We deliver those stimuli at slightly different times, and the task is that that individual tells us which stimulus occurred first. So, for example, I'll show you what I mean. So, birthday man, I'd like you to participate in this. Would you be able to stand up, please? Do you have another name? Alistair. So, Alistair, we might be delivering tactile stimuli to Alistair's hands, and to represent that, I'm going to click my fingers. Right, so that would be your left and your right. Is that okay? Can you close your eyes and tell me which one occurred first? You can point. Left, well done. Okay, keep your eyes closed. Okay, so Alistair's starting to make mistakes. It's clearly an old birthday. But can you understand that? So sometimes we do, and Alistair would say, left, well done. Or we might do, and Alistair would say, right. Thanks, Alistair, you can sit down. And we do that over and over, and we just change the separation between those stimuli. So sometimes it feels like this, and other times it feels like this. And it's more difficult when they're close. Nod if you understand the paradigm. Lots of nods, great, cool. So, when we do that with people with pathological hand pain on one side, we have to stimulate the bad side before the good side for them to think we stimulated them together.